So first of all, I want to welcome you to the Peace Conference, Local Peace Formation, Solidarity, Freedom and Autonomy in Times of Crisis, Conflict and War, organized by the Conflict, Peace and Democracy Cluster, organized by Janina Dannenberg from the International Peace Observer Network, short EPON, the Department of Peace Studies at the University of Graz, Heike Wendt and Maximilian Lakic, also both from the University of Graz, and last but not least by the Varna Institute for Peace Research, short VIPR. It's a great pleasure that you all found the time. And yeah, as far as I can see, there are a lot of people here, and this makes me proud and glad, also a bit excited and nervous. My name is Joseph Milbauer. I'm working on my PhD in the field of political science. I study philosophy as well. And I'm working for the Bulgarian Varna Peace Institute. And maybe I can mention that together with Professor Werner Roof, I'm working on a handbook, Critical Peace Studies. So feel free to contact me if you would like to contribute or to receive further information. As I mentioned earlier, for our social media channels, we would like to take pictures, and we would also record this peace conference. So as I mentioned, feel free to switch off your camera or change your name. Yeah, and before we move on, I want to thank you, my colleagues, Max, Janina, and Heike for the organization and for the work. And yeah, and maybe some words about the conference. Despite being far from another and despite our differences, we have at least one thing in common. We are confronted with the so-called multiple crisis. The multiple crisis contains not only the economic crisis since 2007 and 8, the crisis of political representation, as Wolfgang Merkel, for example, in his book stated, the rise of right-wing actors, social inequality, war, and so on and so forth, but also the tragic ecological crisis. And Professor Roy Casagrande from Austin, Texas will talk about and will address all this crisis and phenomenon in his keynote speech. And especially in these times, in times of crisis, we need more solidarity, more peace, and more free autonomous spaces. So this is the aim of this conference. So with these remarks and with this short introduction, I would like to present you the co-host and moderator of this event, Maximilian Lakic. Max is a senior scientist at the Department of Global Governance of the Institute of the Foundation of Law at the University of Graz. He published several scientific articles and books, and he held many keynote speeches and participated in many such conferences. So, dear Max, the floor is yours.
Thanks for the introduction, and first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me participate in this great initiative, which is actually Joseph's initiatives, which he organized with in a really short time with a lot of efforts, and I put his heart in it. And I think it's really a great conference that he put together, and I'm really glad that I can be a part of it. So thanks for having me, first of all, Joseph. And I'll now go through the program only shortly, so that everyone knows what we can expect today. So the first session within of our program are the keynote speeches. The first keynote speech, as Joseph already briefly touched upon, is by Roy Casagrande from Austin Community College, with a presentation on the multiple crises that are haunting our challenge politics today. The second keynote speech is by Tamara Anya Candela Gomez de la Torre from Bielefeld Graduate School in History and Sociology. She'll speak about liberation, theology, and liberal peace, of course, with a focus on Latin America. Then comes a panel discussion on the Philippines with Janina Dannenberg from International Peace Observers Network, Germany. And Regleto Aldrich Imbong, he is an assistant professor at the College of Social Sciences at the University of the Philippines, Cebu. Then we have our panel discussion on Iraq with Heike Wendt from the University of Graz. Unfortunately, Heike prepared the presentation with her good friend and colleague from Mosul University, Anwar Al-Faidi from the University of Mosul, as already said. But we are really shocked to hear from his death. So he died really unexpectedly last week. But I'm sure Heike will say a few words to that. Our final panel discussion is on Rojava. We had invited Berso Mahmoud from Kamishli, but unfortunately there was a death in his family and he had to commute to Damascus today. But we still have Alan here from the Center for Teaching and Learning from Vienna, who will join us later today. And then we also have prepared we have a video presentation, a video message to us by Yuri Chelyashenko from Kiev, which we might show to you as a concluding presentation, maybe, or if we'll have time, we'll edit after a panel. So we're really it's great to have Yuri with us, at least with a video message. As you all of you might be aware, situation in Kiev is not as it was some weeks ago. Rocket strikes are really hard on the electricity infrastructure. So he was able to prepare this video, and we are glad that we can show it. And the video presentation will be about peace movements and propaganda. So with this being said, I'll give back the word to Joseph, and he'll guide us through the first keynote speech.
Yeah, thank you, Max. Now I will, hopefully it works. Okay. Please give me a sign if you can hear and see him. Now, this is the keynote speech from Professor Roy Casagrande, his video message from his professor of government at the Austin Community College, and he will speak about the multiple crises and what we are facing today. And in the end, there is some hope, so don't panic.
Let me start by first thanking everybody for allowing me to address you. Some of the topics that you will be covering today are heavy topics, and I'm not going to make the situation any better because I'm going to try to frame the current global situation that we're in. So to begin with, sort of the obvious thing I think to sort of bring to everybody's attention is the doomsday clock has the world at 100 seconds to midnight. So that is the closest that scientific community believes we have come to having a nuclear war. They've been measuring that for about 75 years now, and we're at 100 seconds to midnight, meaning it's dangerous. The situation we're in is extremely dangerous. Really, when you think about it, one big mistake. We're one mistake away. Now, that's the worst we've ever been. In other words, when 1962, we were not 100 seconds to midnight. In 1973, and 1970 for that matter, which I think was closer than 73, we were not 100 seconds to midnight. In other words, the situation the world is in this moment is actually the most dangerous in terms of nuclear war that we have ever been in. This, of course, happened during the Trump administration. The election of Donald Trump definitely is the superficial moment in which it became abundantly clear that the earth was destabilizing politically, obviously economically and socially as well. But in this particular moment, in this particular measurement, what we're talking about is the structure that keeps states from doing World War III. That was eroding. I think the tragedy is that with the election of Biden, we haven't seen an increase in that time. In other words, it didn't go to 2 minutes. It didn't return to 3 minutes. We're still at 100 seconds to midnight. Now, obviously, one of the reasons for that is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And then, of course, another reason to make that situation, that makes the situation so unstable, is the People's Republic of China's recent rhetoric over Taiwan, and then the United States' counter rhetoric, which is to say that the United States will definitely fight for Taiwan. In the case of Ukraine, the United States has made it very clear it will not fight for Ukraine. But of course, we've turned the Ukraine-Russia war into a proxy war between the United States and Russia. Of course, proxy wars were very common during the Cold War. Just think of the war between Ethiopia and Somalia. That was probably one of the more famous and catastrophic of all proxy wars. In the end, the United States' ally Somalia imploded and has never recovered, right? It's still essentially a failed state. And so the consequence of proxy wars can be very, very severe. And it can be dangerous, but not as dangerous as a direct confrontation, like the possibility of Taiwan seems to be hinting at. So I guess one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves is, how did we get to this moment? And then how do we get away from this moment? And I think that's at the core of what everybody has to look at in the coming few years. First of all, we're not just destabilized because we're on the verge of World War III. We're also destabilized because we're in the middle of a global warming crisis, and the world seems incapable or unwilling to really address this. The Biden administration just did pass a multi-billion-dollar package to address global warming, but it's at a time when we need to be spending trillions of dollars, not billions of dollars. In other words, he's on the right track, but he's doing about 0.1% of what we need to be doing. And so as we face this global warming crisis, one of the things we need to point out is the effect that it is directly having on the planet. So the Syrian civil war didn't just happen, right? There are events that led to it. The refugee crisis that the United States' war on Iraq obviously contributed to the Syrian civil war and exacerbated, if for no other reason, that ISIL was in fact originally an Iraqi organization that retreated into Syria. But another factor that everybody needs to kind of remember about the Syrian civil war is the role that the drying up Euphrates River had on agriculture. Now, the Euphrates River isn't just drying up because of global warming. That is definitely a contributing factor. But another problem is the fact that Turkey has dammed up the river and is taking more than its fair share of the water. And it's so bad, of course, that the river is drying up all the way through Iraq as well. So it's affecting Iraq. In addition to global warming, there's this sort of direct human-caused problem that Turkey has created. Another problem that the world is facing is the fact that the planet is becoming dumber. So you go, well, how can that be? In the age of information, we have access to all these things, right? Like you can take my cell phone, for example, and the fact that I instantaneously can look up anything. If I get in an argument or I can't remember a detail, I can just look up the facts. But that's not how the human mind works. We're not a rational, fact-driven species. We're an emotional, cognitive dissonance driven species. Our goal as a species, as individuals, is usually, how do I reinforce the nonsensical beliefs that I hold? And so instead of seeking information that contradicts your beliefs so that you can try to figure out what the truth is, what we do is we tend to seek information that reinforces our beliefs. So the age of information has become an age of cognitive dissonance reinforcement instead of liberating ourselves from these bad beliefs. And then, of course, conspiracy theories and disinformation have become rampant, and it's affected the democracies on the planet because we have this huge population of uninformed voters who believe everything that they see. And social media, of course, is at the heart of this. Facebook and Twitter and Instagram have played a catastrophic role in disinforming our population. in the middle of all of this, we're also seeing a dramatic decrease in the number of democracies on the planet, in addition to the erosion for the existing democracies and their institutions. So, for example, in the case of the United States is probably on the path to losing its status as a democracy. It has two political parties because a long time ago, it established single-member district representation, and then the two political parties realized they had the opportunity to not share with other political parties, and so they reinforced the institutions that eliminated third parties. Well, one of the two political parties now has officially lost its status as a democracy-supporting political party. It is officially an authoritarian political party, and that political party has made great strides in figuring out how to cheat in elections, but not in the way you think. So, right, when we think of Putin, we think of his cheating, we think of ballot box stuffing, we think of changing the votes. I cast my vote for somebody else and it shows up as a vote for Putin. That's the kind of over-the-top cheating that I think most people assume is going on. In the United States, there are two ways in which the political system has been altered, and they're both legal. This is a form of legal cheating. One is you are allowed as a rich person to give unlimited sums of money to your favorite politicians, in effect, not only rigging the election by buying TV ads and spreading disinformation, but then also purchasing your own personal politician. On top of that, though, there is gerrymandering. And gerrymandering is where the politicians themselves draw the districts where they're voted out of. And as a result, they can draw the district to include the communities that will get them elected or re-elected. And then they can draw the districts for the other candidates in such a way that it'll hurt their chances of election. And so, in other words, in the United States, from an ethical, not a legal standpoint, but from an ethical standpoint, the United States has just as much cheating as any other state on the planet. It's just we've legalized it. So we've legalized bribery and we've legalized rigging the election to create a specific outcome. As if this isn't enough, the planet is also in the middle of a wave of increased authoritarianism. The rise of the extreme far right has actually killed multiple democracies. So take Poland and Hungary as an example, Turkey as well, and has jeopardized other democracies. Obviously, we've just talked about the United States, and it's still in jeopardy, right? There's a high probability that 2024 will be the last democratic election in the United States. It'll be like Germany's second 1932 election. And then, of course, in the case of India, we're seeing the erosion of democracy under Narendra Modi's rule. Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil has also definitely damaged Brazil's democracy. If he doesn't lose in the second round of elections, which I think is a distinct possibility, I think we can also assume Brazil will cease to be a democracy going forward. Chile just had an opportunity to vote in one of the best designed constitutions in our species' history, and it rejected it. And the same year, 2022, Tunisia, the only successful Arab state from the Arab Spring to actually democratize, just adopted a constitution that ended its democracy. So Italy has gone fascist. The fascists did very well in the last Swedish elections. And the list goes on, right? So in the middle of all of this, it's a little hard to find hope. Global warming, death to democracy, extreme far right. We're on the brink of nuclear war. Russia has decided to tear up the Ukraine. China's talking about a war to grab Taiwan. To make things worse, we're also in the planet's worst ever refugee crisis. One stat that I think is a little jarring is Arabs are 6% of the world's population, but Arabs are 50% of the world's refugees. This doesn't include the Afghan refugees, which will probably only increase because the Taliban have done such a poor job of stabilizing the Afghan state. And there is still a civil war in Afghanistan. And if that civil war grows, it'll only contribute to further destabilizing the Emirate of Afghanistan, the Islamic Emirate. So in the midst of all of this, We've already hinted at the role that refugee crisis caused, the damage it caused to Syria. We know what it's done to Europe. I mean, it is one of the contributing factors to Brexit. It is one of the reasons why Bolsonaro and Duda have done so well in Hungary and Orban and Duda have done so well in Hungary and Poland. Obviously, in the case of Bolsonaro, just plain old white supremacy and racism have fueled his election. And the same, of course, is true for Trump. And so one of the great, and of course, Trump put refugee children in cages after he separated them from their parents. Right now, the Republican Party in the United States is doing a stunt where they're grabbing people who've made refugee claims and they're flying them to Democratic-controlled parts of the country in a way to draw attention to the refugee crisis, that in a negative way, right? To frame it as if it's some sort of terrible catastrophe that the United States is undergoing, instead of seeing it that the refugee is the person going through the catastrophe. In any case, the United States destroying Iraq in the war that went from 2003 to 2011, but even in the previous sanctions in the war in 1991, not only killed somewhere around 2.5 million Iraqis, and not only helped trigger a catastrophic refugee crisis, but it destabilized the region. And now we see a conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia that has largely been fought by proxy war in places like Syria and Yemen. But in the middle of all of this, there is a little glimmer of hope. And that hope has come from the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran is currently undergoing a revolution. If the revolution succeeds and the Islamic Republic is in fact toppled, which I think is definitely on the table, I think there's a high probability that that will be the outcome. It will be the world's first ever true feminist revolution. So, of course, some of you will think back to Iceland in 1975. I want to point out that Iceland in 1975 didn't have the kind of violence and prolonged struggle that the women of Iran are experiencing. So it's a very different thing. Iceland, I guess, deserves a lot of credit for what it did in 75, but what Iran is doing right now might be setting the tone for the planet. Periodically in the human experience, there are these moments where all of a sudden there's a consciousness shift. So 1848, 1990, 1969, 1989. There are these moments that shape and shift global consciousness on a large scale. And it may be that we're in 2022 about to have this event happen again. And the reason I'm saying this isn't just because I'm trying to find a little bit of hope, but because these things tend to go as pendulum swings. So, for example, in the aftermath of the 1960s, the United States went flying to the right. We got Nixon and Reagan, and then Bush and Clinton and Bush, and now Trump. So, in other words, we're heading towards a fascist, authoritarian end if Donald Trump gets a second term. But at some point in that pendulum swing, the pendulum stops and it starts to go back the other way. And it is my belief that Iran, if it pulls off this revolution, might be signaling the beginning of that movement into the other direction. And with that, I will let you get on with the business at hand. I look forward to a report on how all the conference went. Thanks so much again. Take care.
Yes, this was Professor Roy Casagrande from Austin, Texas, with his video message. And I believe, Tamara, you are the next keynote speaker. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Hello to everybody. Thank you for the invitation to this conference, and also for offering this space. Talking about political struggles and peace, wars, and also of liberal peace and alternatives to it I would like to share with you two of the findings of my research I did in Guatemala about liberation theologians who were politically active in the time of war from 1960 to 1996, and also afterwards in times of so-called peace. The first finding was that the only academic field which focuses on progressive religious agents is the field of peace studies. But interestingly, I didn't find any publications about liberation theologists in the corresponding literature. The main reason for that is the liberal framework of the field that simply doesn't take into account progressive religious agents whose struggle is not liberal, but, for example, socialist. A second finding was that anti-systemic religious work in Guatemala prevailed in the 60s and 70s, in the times of the armed conflict of the war, and that it consisted mainly of the creation of unions and cooperatives. That means that was mainly self-organized and not institutionalized political work. But such kind of work ended in the 80s with an amount of state violence in general, but mainly against political opponents. From that time on, and especially since the 90s, progressive religious activism in Guatemala was increasingly co-opted and institutionalized by liberal peace and its programs. And as a result of these developments and other developments in Guatemala, anti-systemic religious work diminished, as well as political utopias in general. I think a phenomenon that we can see now in many parts of the world. So today, in a time of multiple crises, like the capitalist crisis, the pandemic, wars, increasing militarization, and so on, these findings highlight the importance of the search for and the discussion of alternatives to capitalism and also to liberal peace, which I think is also the aim of this conference today. What we also should remember is that crises do not only have negative outcomes, but that they are also moments in which new horizons of imagination and new opportunities for agency and also alternative political models can arise. So I think it's also the moment to take a closer look at the alternatives, of which many arose and arise in regions where people are strongly affected by capitalism, colonialism, racism, and patriarchy. So one of the examples is the Kurdish struggle, and especially the Kurdish women's movement, I think, which also will be discussed today. But we can find inspiration also in other struggles, for example, in the struggle of the Zapatistas. Although here it's important to say that demands for autonomy, territory, and liberation from colonial and state or occupation are also increasingly part of the struggles of other indigenous and peasant movements in Latin America. And another related example, and my last example, is the increasing feminist grassroots organizing in Latin America, which comes mostly from indigenous, peasant, Afro, and working class feminists. And I think that because of their horizontal organizing and their proposals for political and social solutions outside the logics of capitalism, these feminists contribute to democratic organizing from below, and by this they could also lead to more democratic processes in the region in general, and therefore also maybe to more justice, equality, and peace. Yeah. With these words, I conclude my keynote speech, and I'm sure that now we will hear very interesting contributions. Thank you.
Should we begin with the first panel discussion on the Philippines?
Okay, let's do so then. We can go into the different regions. Now, I'm very sorry for the birds that you hear in my background. They were silent all morning, but now they started to yell. Whatever, I hope you can still understand me. So thank you very much, Joseph, for organizing this. Yeah, since I'm the first one to speak on the Philippines, I'm Janina Danberg. I work for IPON International Peace Observers. I'm based in Germany, actually in Hamburg. And yeah, since I'm the first one to talk about the Philippines, I will give you some general information about the Philippines and about the peace and conflict setting there. And after that, I will introduce the background of my organization, IPON, some basic facts, and how we support the engagement for human rights and peace. So from prehistoric time onwards, people from different surrounding areas already lived in the Philippines and moved there, and the area became an increasingly important for international trading. But from the end of the 16th century, it was a Spanish colony. It was colonized by Spain. Later, due to a liberation movement and the Spanish-American War in 1898, it became an American colony. Both colonial times, the Spanish one and the US time, are still visible today in the Philippines, in the culture and in everyday life. So also the social issues that are relevant today and the ecological issues have a lot to do with the colonial time. After World War II, the Philippines became a presidential democracy, which later turned into a dictatorship under Ferdinand Marcos in the 1970s and 1980s. After a peaceful revolution in 1986, a series of democratic governments was elected and handled great social and economic problems in kind of different ways. And I think what Roy just said in his speech about the shrinking democracies in the world, I think Philippines is also one of them. We have a few years under Rodrigo Duterte are behind us, and now it's the new president is the son of the former dictator Marcos. So when it comes to social ecological issues, I would just name a few, and this is first and foremost the unequal land distribution in the Philippines. Huge portions of the land belong to very few elite families. There have been many agrarian reforms that try to redistribute land, but they were not completely implemented, or the success was very limited so far. But of course, there are also successes in land distribution that farmers have been fighting for. Then there are conflicts around environmental resources. The Philippines is very rich in resources. For example, gold mining, copper mining are huge issues. The point is that the areas where these resources are mostly indigenous peoples' areas, ancestral domains of indigenous peoples who hold pre-colonial land rights there, and that should be consulted before doing any kind of mining activities there. There are huge conflicts about that also. Then the political system has great problems with corruption. For example, the justice system is very weak. Impunity is a very pervasive problem. Prosecution takes very long, and also lawsuits take very long. But the Philippines have a very strong civil society and a very strong social movement. But under the movement and the civil society is very much under the pressure of state repressions. Their spaces are shrinking. I will talk about that later. And of course, there are armed conflicts in the Philippines. That's why we are here today. When we talk about peace, that's also often about armed conflicts, right? So on one hand, we have the conflict around the autonomy of Muslim regions in southern Philippines and Mindanao. These go back to the policies of putting settlers there, largely ignoring that there were Muslim people living already in that areas. And also during the martial law, there were just very few spaces for democratic participation and for like rejecting this in a democratic way. So the struggle had to become violent. Today, there is a peace contract, and we have a phase of transitional governance that recently has been extended until 2025. So at the moment, an autonomous Muslim region is to be built there. But of course, there are still many weapons in the area, religious and ideological prejudices, feuds, hostilities, and the socioeconomic and political problems in the Bangsamoro, that's the name of the region, cannot be solved overnight. So there's still, you cannot really call it peace at the moment. And then the second one is the conflict around the armed insurgency of the NDF, the National Democratic Front in the Philippines. I'm not going to talk much about that because that's what the speaker from the Philippines will talk about. There has been a communist insurgency for decades already. At the moment, the government tries to keep it small through localized approaches, but most civil society groups call for peace negotiations on a centralized level. Also, the Action Network Human Rights in the Philippines, this is where my organization, EPON, is a member of. And connected to this is the so-called war against terrorism, which the last government called out, and which goes along with, for example, the red tagging of any kind of activists or any kind of people that are politically active. Red tagging means, so I'll talk about red tagging later shortly anyway. The spaces for shrinking society, for civil society is shrinking, it's shrinking. So, and then there is another armed conflict in a way, even though it has only one side that is armed, and that is the so-called war on drugs. It's actually a war against poor. The last president, Rodrigo Duterte, called out to kill any kind of drug dealers and drug users. And this framework was also used to kill people that other people just wanted to get rid of. So some organizations say that there are up to 30,000 people shot already under that frame or in that context. Of course, the official numbers are much higher, but these are also a few thousand deaths that the government even would say that killed them. So what's the role of EPON in this? EPON stands for International Peace Observers Network. So what we are using is the instrument actually of human rights observation. So if we're doing human rights observation, why is it Peace Observers Network? It's because of the strong nexus actually of peace and human rights. On one hand, the ignorance of human rights violations can be a root cause of violent conflicts. This applies for civil and political as well as for economic, social, and cultural rights. In the Philippine case, for example, the heavy discrimination against Muslim population and indigenous peoples that has been taking place for such a long time is producing an armed conflict, and it's a human rights problem that is behind that. And the state repression and the martial law caused the oppressed in Mindanao to go for armed forms of resistance, because in general you can say if people do not have no space to fight for their right in a non-violent way, they would use violence in the end. And when it comes to indigenous peoples, their rights to land and their rights to cultural integrity often is violated. So, and all in all, many of the socio-economical concerns that also the land distribution issues, for example, that kind of feed the communist insurgency, actually they are related to economic and social rights. So strengthening human rights on a local level would prevent conflicts from growing. And this is actually what the human rights defenders in the Philippines do, that IPON also works with, that are, for example, indigenous peoples that are trying to fight for self-determination of their ancestral domain, like our partner group Padata, or farmers that keep on fighting for land reform, for land distribution, for the right to food, for the right to land. These are all human rights defenders, and in practice, they contribute to the prevention of more armed conflict through their political work. At the same time, human rights violations are also an effect of violent conflicts. In each and every conflict, I think, in the world, human rights are abused and violated. Therefore, in conflict settings, it's needed to advocate for the respect of human rights. And this is, for example, what in the Philippines, in the context of the so-called war on drugs, what people and organizations do, that they fight against extrajudicial killings, against the killing of drug users. Yeah, and IPON is also trying to help to make the work of these human rights defenders, of these people, more secure. All these politically active human rights defenders that IPON works together with, they have one in common, and that's the fact that they actually face heavy repression. Increasingly, human rights defenders face harassment, criminalization. They are confronted with trumped up charges. There is a new legislation against terrorism in the Philippines that makes it possible that any person that are active in civil society, no matter if they have any connection to violent groups or not, can be jailed. It's very dangerous now in the Philippines to show political commitment in any way at the moment. And what I said before, the phenomena behind many repressions, including the many killings of activists, is the so-called red tagging or red baiting. That's the act of labeling or branding, naming, and accusing individuals or organization of being like left-leaning, subversives, communists, terrorists. And this is used as a strategy by state agents, particularly law enforcement agencies and the military, against those people that they perceive to be threats or enemies of the state, even though they are probably just NGO workers, whatever. If people get red tagged, life can become very dangerous for them. Our speaker from the Philippines today will have another focus in his talk, I think, but even in the academe, it happens that people get red tagged with restrictions, which restricts somehow also the academic freedom or also liberation theologists or some church movements. They also face a lot of red tagging. It's really a challenge to be politically active in the Philippines today. However, in some cases where human rights defenders are under threat, international human rights observation, that is what IPON does, can be supportive. Yeah, this is what we do actually. Upon request of human rights defenders, we do trial observation, visits in prison, accompaniment to police or other state actors, or the observation of rallies. We document human rights violation and bring cases to state actors in the Philippines or to international institutions. What kind of actions needed? We would decide like very specific on a case-to-case basis. Our goal is to contribute to the safety of the human rights defenders in the Philippines, so therefore to the safety of people and organizations that support peace. We do never intervene in the conflict of the human rights defenders itself, and we never intervene in their strategies as long as they don't use violence. Our only goal is to broaden their spaces for engagement. And through this approach, we make sure that even unequal power relations cannot lead to programmatic influences of ours. On the international level, we try to use existing instruments of power to support local initiatives for human rights, for peace, for justice, and for social change. So that's it actually from IPON. We have not worked together with the organization where the Philippine speaker Rigleto comes from. So I'm very excited what he will be telling us today about the struggle for peace and for peace negotiation. He is involved. Thank you very much. So I turn it over to Rigleto directly.
Thank you very much, Janina, for a comprehensive background of the economic and socio-political situation here in the Philippines. Indeed, it's a very dangerous time to live here in the Philippines. I actually prepared a presentation. If I could be given the or allowed to be a co-host so that I can share the presentation. Okay. So, can you see the presentation? Okay. So I'll be talking about the history and struggle for a just and lasting peace in the Philippines and its prospects under the Marcos administration. So I'm Rigleto Aldrich Imbong, Associate Professor of Philosophy from the University of the Philippines, Cebu. It is one of the campuses of the University of the Philippines, which is the national university. I'm a former core group member of the Philippine Ecumenical Peace Platform. So it is a group of Christian denominations funded by the Royal Norwegian government to support the peace negotiations between the government of the Philippines and communist insurgents. So this is a photo in one of the what we call peace summits conducted here in Cebu. So we have in this photo Christian leaders from the Roman Catholic, from the United Church of Christ in the Philippines, from the Philippine Independent Church, and several other Christian denominations. Joining the leaders is someone from the government panel, Hernani Braganza. Unfortunately, we were not able to secure a speaker from the communist side here. So yeah, and the people at the back are civil society leaders who are also supporting the peace talks between the government and the communist insurgents, with the aim of finally instituting socioeconomic reforms, political reforms to address the root causes of the armed conflict. Okay. So, so for more than 4 decades, the Philippines has been under several colonizers. So first came the Spanish colonizers, and they brought with them they brought with them basically, especially to the Visayan and the Luzon areas, the feudal system of production, feudal system, and institutionalized, for example, the encomienda and hacienda system. And aside from this, the Spaniards also identified some middle persons, middlemen who would act as people who would pacify the other Filipinos, no? And yeah, would act as the middle persons, and this later would become the new breed of elite politicians who would become the trusted and loyal allies of the colonizers, who would rule in behalf of the Spanish colonizers. So for more than 3 centuries, the Spaniards ruled the Philippines, and towards the end of the 19th century, nationalist and revolutionary movements eventually challenged the Spanish colonial rule. And while the revolutionary movement was about to really win in a nationwide scale, the Americans came to claim for themselves the victory, to act as the liberators of the Filipinos, and even waged a very deadly and barbaric war against the Filipinos. So instead of enjoying liberation, the Filipinos were subjugated by another colonizer, the American colonizers this time. So they were here for more than half a century, and basically just continued what the Spaniards started. So the problem of landlessness basically just continued. The peasants were more and more deprived of the land that they were tilling, while the Americans introduced suffrage and democratic style of governance, but they were also able to train trusted Filipino elites who would rule in their behalf. Thus, even after they left the Philippines in 1946, the country was under what we call new colonialism. And then for a short period of time, for like 3 years, the Japanese also invaded the country. So basically there are in the Philippines, there are what we call colonial residues or colonial legacies. So we need to contextualize the struggle for peace that civil society organizations are currently fighting for, within the background of colonialism and neo-colonialism, because colonialism has bred, for example, foreign control in several aspects of the country, the economy, politics, culture, and many others. So all of the Philippine presidents have been, when they run for presidency, have been seeking the blessing, no, of the US, no, for them to be able to seeking the support for them to be able to attain legitimacy against their opponents. So there's this foreign control. Laws are made to basically serve the interests of foreign capitalists or big businesses to the detriment of the interests of, say, for example, the indigenous peoples in Mindanao. Yanina was able to mention the experiences of indigenous groups, no, in Mindanao. So their lands have been rubbed away from them in favor of big multinational companies. And in relation to that also, there is still the lingering problem of land monopoly. So while there have been many attempts to redistribute land in the past, there were many land reform programs in the past, but these programs were intentionally designed to have some loopholes for the landlords to circumvent these. You know? And what's actually problematic in the Philippines is that those who make land reform programs are themselves landlords, no? Big landowners, or if not representatives of these big landowners, which also brings us back to the third problem of elite Ilustrado politics, where those who the elite are just the ones who share among themselves political power. You know? So in the Philippines, political dynasty is a very prevalent issue where clans, families of elite origin are just competing among themselves during the elections, political power, and use this political power to further advance their business and their land interests, and to serve further foreign the interests, you know, of big foreign businesses. So these have been these issues are very much entrenched in the Philippine society, that several organizations, progressive organizations, civil society groups have been struggling, you know, have been fighting to end these issues, or the issues that result from the three problems that I mentioned earlier. So we have here from the church, you know, from the students, you know, and the academic sector, from the indigenous peoples who are calling to stop large-scale mining in Mindanao, mining which has resulted to the killing of indigenous peoples as well, and the rampant, you know, impunity in the Philippines, which basically just leaves behind, you know, or ignores the killings that are taking place in the Philippines. No? Killings not only against the most marginalized sectors like the peasants and the workers, but even among the middle class, no? the lawyers, even church people. So we have Father Tito Paez, for example, was murdered at the beginning of the Duterte administration. So,
and the AFP is alarmed over an increasing number.
I'll share a short video.
And the AFP is alarmed over an increasing number of youth joining the NPA. The number of young individuals joining the New People's Army in the Cordillera region is increasing. As Dobby de Guzman tells us, most of the new recruits are from Manila.
Commander Corinne has a degree in international studies from one of the country's leading universities. After graduation, she immediately applied for a staff position in the country's foreign service. She was hired, but she didn't accept the offer. She decided to join the New People's Army.
Noong una, talagang hirap na hirap silang tanggapin. Dumaan yung nanay ko sa matinding stress. Nagkaroon siya ng mental fatigue.
Caroja a former journalism student at UP Diliman, is also a member of the NPA Kuman in Ifugao.
Hindi ko naman siya give up. Kasi parang maski naman dito sa revolusyonaryong kilusan, nagagawa ko pa rin yung magsulat at saka magpaliwanag at saka lahat ng ginagawa ng isang journalist sa isang mainstream media, nagagawa ko naman dito.
The two rebels believe serving the masses is more noble than climbing the corporate ladder. Ka John, who is also from Manila, said the NPA in the Cordillera region remains solid because of the young blood joining the insurgency.
Kahit anong mga sabihin ng gobyerno kontra sa kilusan, nakikita naman ng napakalawak ng mga kabataan yung kawastuhan ng sinasabi ng revolusyonaryong kilusan tungkol sa kung paano napapabayaan yung mga kabataan.
Some experts say the government is creating its own enemy.
Ito din inagpapakita na tumataas yung level ng discontent ng tao, particular ng mga kababaihan, sa gobyerno, sa batas, sa pagpapatupad ng batas at iba pang mga policies.
So they join because of the sense of adventure, but later on they will realize na sometimes they are hooked or sometimes they were duped.
The armed forces of the Philippines admitted that this is a huge concern that needs to be addressed.
Tunay na isang malaking problema sa atin ito, lalong-lalo na sa isang pamilya na kung saan nagmula itong mga kabataan na to, sapagkat malaki ang mawawala sa kanila yung mga pangarap ng mga magulang nila na magkaroon ng magandang kinabukasan.
According to Major Bulusan, the AFP continues to strengthen its information education campaign to dissuade the youth from joining the communist movement. Dobby de Guzman, ABS-CBN News.
Okay. So aside from the struggles that civil society organizations are waging, there's also separate, armed struggle that's waged in the countryside, in the hinterlands of the Philippines, basically to end the problems that I have mentioned in the previous slide. So there have been several administrations that confronted the said armed conflict that's waged by the communists, and it's either they have declared an all-out war against the Communist Party of the Philippines and the New People's Army, or they have in one way or another settled for a peaceful resolution of the conflict. So I'll briefly give you a historical background about this. So in 1968, the Communist Party of the Philippines was established. This was during the time of the dictator Ferdinand Marcos Sr. And a year after that, the New People's Army was also established. So the two groups have been waging an armed struggle with the hope of ending the three colonial legacies that I have mentioned earlier. Then in 1973, the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, or the NTFP, is the political organization of the CPP-NPA, or the Alliance of All Forces, calling for armed struggle, was also formed. So this was during the time of Marcos. So the Marcos regime was gave birth because of the crisis, economic and political crisis that was taking place back then. Armed insurgency waged by the communists emerged. So that's basically for more than a decade of dictatorial rule. And when finally the Marcos administration was toppled by 1986, the succeeding administration of Cory Aquino entertained the peaceful resolution of the armed conflict. So it was during her term that the first negotiations between the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the NDFP were carried out. However, the negotiations was short-lived because later on, a year after, peasants were violently massacred, while they were peacefully protesting to pressure the Cory administration to immediately redistribute the lands that she promised, that her administration promised to redistribute, So I guess 14 peasants were killed in this event. So the NDFP withdrew from the negotiating table, and there was an impasse in the peace negotiations. Then came the Ramos administration. Ramos is a West Pointer. He's a general. He's a military general, and he was rather open to the peace negotiations. And it was even during his term that a significant agreement was reached. This was called the Hague Joint Agreement, 1992. So basically, the Hague Joint Agreement laid the foundations or the framework for the peace negotiations, and it identified 4 substantive agenda. You have human rights and international humanitarian law, socioeconomic reforms, political and constitutional reforms, and then the disposition of forces and cessation of hostility. So the logic of the agreement was to follow this in order. No? So you have to address first human rights and international humanitarian law. The 2 parties acknowledged that there is a civil war, and while they wage a civil war, they must be as humane as possible. So they have to adhere to international humanitarian law, and afterwards, socioeconomic reforms have to be addressed or have to be reached in order for the root causes of the problems to be addressed as well, and for these socioeconomic reforms to be institutionalized. Certain reforms, also legal, political, and constitutional reforms, have to be established, and it's only after that forces can be disposed of, no, and there's a cessation to hostility. So it was also in the Ramos administration that the document JASIG, Joint Agreement on Safety and Immunity Guarantees, was signed. So this basically gave immunities to both the parties, the GRP and the NDFP, against surveillance, harassments, arrests, no, and other forms of atrocious, no, activities. And in 1998, during the Estrada administration, the first item for the substantive agenda was signed. This was the CARIL, or the Comprehensive Agreement for the Respect of Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law. So later on, the next administration, the Arroyo administration, because of her brutal counterinsurgency efforts called the Oplan Bantaylaya 1 and 2, which basically started, not actually started, but intensified, no? Because it was in the Marcos administration where red tagging basically started, no? Through Oplan Bantaylaya 1 and 2, many legal activists were summarily executed, abducted, and harassed because of the baseless red tagging accusations, no? What Yanina had mentioned earlier. So and later on, Arroyo declared the CPP-NPA along with the chief political consultant of the NDFP, Jose Maria Sison, as terrorist group, thereby rendering impossible the continuation of the talks. So the political environment that could actually somehow make the peace talks more conducive was lost, no, because of this unfortunate developments. So then later there was the second Aquino administration, but initially there was a hope, no. Almost all presidents actually are open to negotiations to the resumption of peace talks during their first years of office, but later on they would somehow make a retract with their earlier statements, and this was also true with the second Aquino administration, who his advisors described, no, the previously signed documents, no, the CARIL, the Hague Joint Agreement, as documents of perpetual division. So what the administration, the Aquino administration wants to do is even to reverse the process, no, reverse the logic of the Hague Joint Agreement, to start first with the disposition of forces and only later address the socioeconomic and political reforms. So there was no common ground to resume the peace talks because of this. Supposedly, it was the Hague Joint Agreement that would allow common ground, but because the administration, again, described as a document of perpetual division, so peace negotiations was not very successful during that time. So, and then, of course, the previous Duterte administration, who initially expressed willingness to resume the peace talks and even released some of the negotiators of the NDFP who were arrested in the previous administrations despite their JASIG document, supposedly their immunity from being arrested. So Duterte released some of the negotiators. But later on, when Duterte was already surrounded by military officials, he appointed more than 50 retired military officials to his cabinet. Eventually, his original and initial pronouncements to pursue the peace negotiations was this time abandoned. So and then later he created the NTF-LCAC, the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict. So what the administration wanted to do is to localize the peace talks in different regions, a move which the NDFP did not really agree to, because of course the logic of the NDFP is that we are talking about systemic national issues, and this could not be addressed by local regionalized negotiations. And then it was also in the time of the Duterte administration that the draconian anti-terror law was enacted. Yanina was able to mention this a while ago. And basically through the law, anyone who would anyone who's critical with the government, progressive organizations, unionists, could easily be tagged as terrorists and be criminalized by the government. So okay, so the I'm almost out of time, but supposedly it was during the time of the Duterte administration that the second item of the substantive agenda be addressed, and it is the CASER. So it's the Comprehensive Agreement for Socio-Economic Reform. So initially both parties, when the NDFP and the GRP, when the GRP was still led by civilian negotiators, both parties recognized that the armed conflict was basically caused by socio-economic maladies, and in order for these for the armed conflict to cease, socio-economic problems have to be addressed, and that's why it's just important and crucial to sign the CASER, or the Comprehensive Agreement for Socio-Economic Reforms. On the left side of the screen is the government version of the CASER. On the right side of the screen is the NDFP version of the CASER. So while both documents actually differ essentially, what they do have in common is the recognition that socio-economic reforms have to be built upon agrarian reform and rural development on the one hand, and national industrialization and economic development on the other. So I've already mentioned a while ago how colonialism and neocolonialism has basically perpetuated a situation of landlessness here in the Philippines, and have caused not only the poverty of the rural population, but also in general, the stagnation of the economic situation of the Philippines. So addressing the issue of landlessness and implementing genuine agrarian reform would actually pave the way for rural development. And on the other hand, building national industries in the Philippines, making Philippines economically independent, would somehow provide jobs for Filipinos, increase productivity for the country, and so on and so forth. So these two elements, these two aspects were recognized by both the government and the NDFP panel. So the civil society organizations, the church, even the academe, was very optimistic in 2016 to 2017, when both panels were already talking about CASER. And they were hopeful that finally, the root causes of the conflict would be addressed. But unfortunately, as I've mentioned earlier, when the Duterte administration was already surrounded by military elements, by the security sector, things drastically changed, no? And even went on to the regime, and even went on to terror tag the NDFP itself and its supposed sympathizers, no? Civil society organizations, unionists, no? And progressive organizations. So what's the prospects of peace under a Marcos presidency? So the Marcos Jr. has been silent on the issue of the resumption of talks between the GRP and the NDFP. Even in his campaign, during his campaign period, he was basically silent about the issue, and his administration has not reversed any single policy that the previous Duterte administration has initiated. For example, the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict is still there. The NTF-ELCAC is notorious for red tagging virtually anyone. Just weeks ago, its former spokesperson red tagged a judge, no? A judge who gave a decision that dismissed the petition of the government proscribing, requesting the proscription of the Communist Party of the Philippines as a terrorist organization. So the judge actually gave a very, very logical, very salient point on why she dismissed it. But rather than debunking point by point the decision, the NTF-ELCAC just basically red tagged her and red tagged everyone that supported the judge. So the prospects for the resumption of peace talks and eventually implementing socioeconomic reforms in the Philippines under the Marcos regime is quite dim. However, civil society organizations, including the church and the academe, have been initiating the campaign, no, to pressure the Marcos administration to go back to the negotiating table and there genuinely address the root causes of the armed conflict, continue the talks for the CASER, and address some of the issues, no, concerning human rights that have been alleged by both parties. So it is our, it is always our desire that these negotiations be resumed, be sustained, and eventually be completed, no, and expressed through agreements, so that finally, no, after years of new colonialism and colonialism, we could get to enjoy, no, what social justice is, no. I think that has been systematically denied from us, especially the most marginalized sectors of society, of the Philippine society. So it's our belief that peace is always based on social justice. It always demands social justice, and it is our commitment to pursue peace. No, even if peace workers, no, or those working for peace here in the Philippines are even red tagged, just because we are also demanding, we are also calling for the signing of the CASER. So it's actually how hilarious it is here in the Philippines, no? No, when we just simply call for reforms, we get red tagged. No? I have been red tagged as well, and what's alarming about these red tagging is that it's a prelude towards assassination. So there have been many activists that have been red tagged in the past. Even academics are not spared of these red tagging. So yeah, indeed, it's dangerous to live here in the Philippines, but we could only continue to be committed to the fight for social justice, to the fight for freedom, to the fight for democracy. So I think I'll end my discussion there. My apologies for going over the time. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll take over here. Thanks, Egleto, for this really insightful presentation. Thanks, Janina. And thereby we also conclude the panel on the Philippines and go over to our next panel on Iraq. I'll first introduce to you Heike Wendt. Heike Wendt is a professor at the Institute of Education Research and Teacher Education at the University of Graz. Her fields of expertise are international comparative studies of educational achievement, school development research, methods, and intercultural education. And she is also involved in a really interesting project. And this is also the reason why she will speak to us today here about Iraq. The respective project is called the RAISI project. It is a cooperation of the University of Graz together with the University of Mosul and the TU Dortmund, and it seeks to build a sustainable future for Iraq, respectively Northern Iraq. So Heike, thanks for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, I also wanted to say thank you very much for the invitation and opportunity to present something today. As I said, I'm professor for education research. I'm not a political analyst. So what I'm going to do and what I wanted to present is that I will not share of a big picture or political analysis of the situation in Iraq, but I wanted to share with you some experience we've been having in an international partnership, maybe as an example which could serve for other university partnerships, in how in times of crisis university actors can show some form of academic solidarity and be part of a positive development. I'm speaking here as the scientific leader of the Rethink Education and Science in Iraq network, which is the university partnership between Mosul University in Iraq, TU Dortmund University in Germany, and Graz University from Austria. We are a network or a group of interdisciplinary, intercultural, and international, a team of academics, and in which we come from all different kinds of scientific backgrounds and different kinds of living situations. I was supposed to give this talk today with my colleague, Professor Dr. Anwar, who's been leading the steering committee of this project with me over the last 7 years. Unfortunately, he passed away 2 weeks ago. Dr. Anwar has been a physicist, a professor for physics at the University of Mosul, and issues around the independence of science, academic freedom, dialogue, and reconciliation has been things he's been striving for, a part of his pursuing his academic career. And we are all very saddened by his loss. It's a big loss for our project, and therefore I would like also to dedicate my little presentation here today in Dr. Anwar's name, and I hope it will be inspiring for all of us to follow his legacy. I've seen that two of my colleagues from the RAISI steering committee are also here with us today in the group. So Mr. Dakhil, who's working at TU Dortmund University as part of the RAISI team there, and Dr. Mohammed, who's assistant professor at the College of Education for Girls, is also here in the group, and maybe they wanted to add something and share their own perspective. Wanted to make sure, and this is a disclaimer, that in our group, we enjoy the freedom of speech, and we also enjoy multi-perspectivity, so any type of political positioning or analysis I'm taking as part of my speak are solely on my own, and I'm not speaking for any of my colleagues. If we would have invited them, they might have shared a different perspective. I'd like to talk a little bit on the role higher education institutions can take in conflict development, and we know from literature that they can rather take an ambivalent role. In peace-building literature, we find quite a common agreement that higher education institutions can contribute to peace-building, reconstruction, and democratization in post-conflict context, in training key social actors, in mediating distributional conflicts, and so on. but also, and this is what we also heard from the colleagues from the Philippines, they can also take quite a different role depending on the political context, maybe in strengthening political dominance and oppression of marginalized groups. Yeah. Academic training without professional opportunities in the country can lead to radicalization. And of course, we all know this may be a positive or a negative development factors, that social struggles are led by university graduates, but also militant groups have been led by university graduates. So here, the role of higher education and the question which role higher education institutions are taking can be important. What we for sure know, if we wanted to take on and strengthen universities as making a positive contribution towards peace building, would also have to take into account and into perspective the different challenges higher education institutions are working on in conflict and post-conflict context. Yeah? So there are maybe more difficult physical, personal, institutional, and social conditions. We often see a damage to physical infrastructure, which has quite big impact on the quality of research, but also on the quality of teaching. Damage to human infrastructure, which may be related to displacement flight, systematic dismissal of members of certain groups, or even attack on academic groups, and which in many countries and also in the context in which we are working on has led to a big phenomenon of brain drain. We see a lot of institutional challenges which are addressed in literature, and also social challenges which are making it very difficult for higher education institutions in conflict-affected regions to perform their social functions as university for research training and being a place for free dialogue and speech. We are working in the context of Mosul University, in the context of Iraq, and I would like to speak about that a little bit, because I think Mosul University here is maybe serving as a good example for the decline and destruction of universities in the Middle East. And Mosul University, since its establishment, being the second largest university in Iraq, with serving more than 40,000 students, having been a key actor. So if we're looking at Mosul University's history, you can see that it had a rather shining start in the 1970s, was among the top 25 universities in the Middle East. Many of the professors who've been appointed to serve at the university have been part of a capacity building program, being graduates from leading universities around the world, which has also led at that time to direct acceptance of graduates from Mosul University, doctoral students of newly appointed professor at top international universities. Mosul University also at that time had a lot of international staff and international connections. The Gulf War and related sanction led to a first, what Dr. Anwar would have called, with whom I prepared this presentation together, cut off from the world. We would here see a first decline of Mosul University. There were cases of looting. Many brilliant academics left the country. We would see a decline of salaries, and most international relations of the university stopped as a direct consequence of the academic sanction. The second Gulf War led to what Dr. Anwar would have called the total destruction of the university. We would have seen huge lootings. Also in that time, there were more than 300 documented assassinations of academics in Iraq, which led to a culture of threat, and also migration of further academics. We would see an intensification of Islamic extremism, which was also felt in the university by a decline of rights for women also to work in their roles as academics, but maybe even also to study. In 2006, we would have seen, as we saw, an escalation of religious conflicts yeah, which maybe was a third decline of Mosul University, the rise of a culture of fear about which many colleagues are reporting, the limitations in academic and personal freedom, complete disappearance of minorities as a consequence of direct attacks, more assassinations of intellectuals by car bombs, many people, many university events, even defense for master thesis and PhD thesis were secret and non-public, and the culture within the university was something which by many colleagues is described as a culture of fear. Also, we would have seen that physically there was a first phase where also there were some reconstruction elements. In 2014, Mosul was invaded by Daesh. This came along with public executions of more than 3,000 people. Mosul as a city with 2 million inhabitants saw that more than half of the population left the country. The university was taken over and run by Daesh until 2017, only in some departments, but it was former graduates of the university who also took over the university leadership under the new rule of Daesh. And colleagues who were forced to stay in the city also being forced to work at the university, but also also there were members who actively supported. University in Mosul under the time of Daesh occupation was characterized by segregation of women and men, the complete change of curriculum, only running certain types of departments which are considered relevant. And it was only in 2017 where the Ministry of Higher Education, decided to withdraw the accreditation. Seen the burning of books, the complete destruction of the university library, destruction and looting of technology, destruction of cultural objects, military lessons, and religious indoctrinations. In 2015, Mosul University, by those colleagues who managed and decided to flee Mosul, was run in exile. The Ministry of Higher Education revoked all Mosul University statuses and permissions in Mosul University and decided to re-establish the university in what they called alternative locations in Kurdistan region. The presidency of the university running out from a hotel in Duhok city. Yeah. The university has several temporary alternative locations, deciding to run undergraduate programs for 14,000 students. So the reality of many university employees who had left the country was that they were receiving their salaries and being traveling academics, meeting their students in various places all over the country in times of displacement. Liberation were quite big in 2017 and ended in October. Mosul itself as a city was destructed almost completely. 70% of the city were destructed, and the university also destructed to a high extent. The central library being completely burned down, the presidency, most infrastructure destroyed, and mines were installed all over the university. Dr. Anwar, who was our colleague with whom I prepared for this, was at that time the dean of the science colleges, and I brought you here to give some ideas what his office and his laboratory looked like when shortly after the liberation, when he had an opportunity to be one of the first people to enter university premises. And this is what the reality for most academics at Mosul University looked like. There were a lot of students and academics, but also civil society actors in the times after the war who risked their lives and contributed to the re-establishment of the university. In 2018, quite early after the liberation, there was a political decision to bring people back to Mosul and opening Mosul University campus as the university being a central civil society actor, being a political decision to push people to return to Mosul. So temporary alternative locations were closed. Staff members and students had to return to Mosul in order to be able to continue their work and continue their studies, which also led to the exclusion of quite some minority students who then at that time did not have the financial means, also for whom security was not considered, to be able to return back to Mosul, especially early after the liberation. Since then, reconstruction started, and the university has been working quite hard on his physical and academic reconstruction in various angles. There's been also several international actors financially supporting the physical reconstruction. I'd like to tell you a little bit about how our partnership, as a very unique university partnership, has been trying to support the academic reconstruction of Mosul University since 2016. Overall, we've organized several events to bring more than 3,000 students and 400 academics from 4 continents together and working together and trying to make a positive contribution to promoting reconciliation, solidarity, freedom of speech, and autonomy across different disciplines, cultures, borders, for and within society. Raising education and science in Iraq, our partnership started in May 2016. This was when me and some colleagues from, I was at that time working at Dortmund University, were working at Duhok University, which Duhok being about 70 kilometers away from Mosul, and the border between the Kurdistan region and the territory was occupied by Daesh, being quite close, and us being lecturers at Duhok University, being directly affected and aware of the situation of Mosul University. The presidency of Mosul University, the exiled presidency at that time, reached out and said that they needed some kind of international partnership, to give some recognition to the work academics were doing, displaced academics were doing, and keeping university as a central pillar of civil society alive, to create some events for people coming together and having some hope through being part of an international connections and people actually not just feeling as displaced students and academic, but also as people whose voice are heard and whose expertise is needed. So we reached out to the German Academic Exchange Service and got some money for that. And in 2017, we together designed a program and had several academics from Mosul University visiting us in Dortmund. And this at that time was the only international partnership Mosul University had. So it contributed to the re-establishment of scientific relations, enabled some global outreach, interdisciplinary dialogue between professors who themselves has been displaced, working all over a certain type of region, and having some kind of place and talking about what's happening, exchanging and discussing what university actors could do in taking more serious their role as leaders. We together decided to organize student conferences as a method to promote reconciliation through science engagement. And we organized our first conference in 2018, which was the first academic event of Mosul University after liberation, bringing together 120 students and 20 professors from different backgrounds, those who were exiled, those who stayed in Mosul, students and academics from minorities and different disciplines, discussing challenges to reconstruction and reconciliation, and together develop strategies in how academics and students could now take a more active role in rebuilding their university. As part of an article I wrote, I interviewed several actors who've been part, together with colleagues who've been part of that first conference, and I asked them what they felt was the impact of that. And here I brought you some quote in how different actors from Mosul University reflected 2 years after about this first academic conference we did. So many of them, they spoke about the importance of having places for dialogue within the university between teachers and students as being a place of healing. You would see that in the first quotes where colleagues are saying we had an opportunity to discuss problems facing our society, and also for us to feel, and this is what they said, to feel again that we are not just subjects or objects of politics, but also that we can feel as subjects and develop together strategies and how we can make a change. What was important about this first conference was that we also had students from minorities attending, especially those from the Yazidi community. And we somehow managed to a certain extent that those students felt that these conferences were a place where they could speak out. And so many of my colleagues from Mosul University would have not expected students to come from the Yazidi community. And so they felt this was maybe a first start for healing and reconciliation, and giving students from those minorities who've been especially affected by the cruelties of the genocide, to give them a forum to speak, and to speak to their former students and colleagues about that. Colleagues also felt that these conferences were important for empowerment of interdisciplinary learning and empowerment across disciplines, that they were a space for dialogue in a free atmosphere, and that they also created opportunities to reconsider roles and maybe to break out some hierarchical rules between teachers and students. Since then, we've organized 6 of these conferences and discussing under different topics, and over the years, we had more than 3,000 students of the universities participating in such activities. The last one was our first conference, which for security reasons was the first one which could be held at Mosul University. It was the first international conference in Mosul after the liberation, with more than 600 students, 150 professors working together for a week in 30 different workshops, discussing challenges to sustainable reconstruction and reconciliation. Yeah. And what was special about this conference also was that student teams were actually supported to develop big ideas into smart implementable projects. So, and actually starting and initiating change within the community. These conferences are interdisciplinary events, and they are extracurricular academic events which are open for everyone within the university and within society. Yeah. You can see here, this is the newly rebuilt theater hall of the university. This is the outside. And you can see here that these conferences create a big opportunity for young people getting together and discussing and sharing ideas across disciplines and across backgrounds. Also, as part of our partnerships, we have been generally supported by the German Academic Exchange Service and the opportunity to create a lot of internationalization opportunities by organizing so-called intensive seminars, which are opportunities for academics of Mosul University coming for a week to Germany to see experience and taste what research, teaching, and organization at a European university looks like. This is especially important because more than 90% of all academic staff of the university have never ever been outside of their country or maybe outside of their city for all their life. Yeah. So imagine all your university professors never ever themselves have been on a plane seeing what a library in another country looking like. So this is a central pillar of our work, widening horizons programs. There are a lot of online activities, especially during the pandemic, creating professional learning opportunities for all of the people in our network, learning together with each other about topics we consider important as current burning issues, which also need to be tackled in the region. We held academic conferences and research symposia, especially giving emerging researchers opportunities to practice a little bit, skills, getting some experiences in what it means to be part of an international community, and hopefully then with some travel experiences, some experiences of being part of academic conferences and symposia, feeling empowered to go to international conferences in the future. What's been important for us in the project over the last years is not that we just stay within our university circles, but we've been working quite a lot on creating maybe what you would call science to public events, discussing with civil society actors challenges to reconstruction and reconciliation in all three of our countries. You see here a picture of a joint exhibition we conducted in Mosul University. This is the Mosul Book Forum, a place of intellectual meetings in front of the university on Fridays where they sell books. And they're also organizing academic events. And here we together organized an exhibition where students got the opportunity to share their ideas and vision for what sustainable reconstruction of Mosul city should look like. At the same time, we held the exhibition at Graz University and having quite a nice big audience in Graz as well, sharing and being part of an international guide. We do empowerment activities for students, had a very lovely cooperation with the Sustainable Development Goals Ambassador of Graz, of the city of Graz, a group of young activists training students in Mosul to become activists and ambassadors for Sustainable Development Goals, many of them being active and having formed their own groups in Mosul. For us, diversifying and celebrating different forms of expressions is important. So been organizing art competitions which we exhibited the work in various places with our universities, educating people in Dortmund and Austria about living realities and different perspectives of young people in Iraq, and as well having art and the value of expression celebrated in Mosul University itself. Now we've been organizing a lot of support for the library to be rebuilt, organizing training for librarians in Germany, and organizing book donations and site visits and having outreach campaigns. And our partnership grew. It's not just an activity we are doing between the three universities, but having managed to have many more universities in the region, especially in Mosul University, sharing our activities with us, and also some more universities from other parts of Germany being part of our networks. And we are always hoping for more people to be part of our community. And we do quite a lot of things to share what we are doing. To sum up, what have been strengthening factors for this type of partnerships? In our reflection, we feel, of course, there's an importance of dedication and commitment by key figures in the group. But this is maybe something which is clear. But what we realized, especially in conflict situations, the focus of science as a common core has a very big potential for doing activities together as academics and also doing that in clear roles. We felt that institutional frames over the last years, just by being a partnership which is supported by an international organization, created some kind of access, security, and purpose, which was easier to communicate for our work rather than us being private people wanting to do initiatives. So we felt the international framing was something very important. And we also felt that the interdisciplinary institutional governance structures we've been working on over the last years has provided a lot of security for individual actors in the group, and also is what we believe the reason why our partnership survived. However, scientists take high personal risks in organizing these partnerships. And I think this is all what you are also aware of, whereas there's a lot of security structure, maybe also for governmental or for governmental actors or actors of non-governmental organizations who are working in crisis regions. Academics do not have access to any of these and need to build those security structures through private relations. And of course, also colleagues who are working within the crisis context also take high personal risks in being associated with such a project where our cooperation, for example, in 2015, when Mosul was still occupied, had in its title, "Let's Rethink Education and Science in Iraq After ISIS." So this was a strong political stand colleagues took and taking personal risks. What we would wish for and what we are advocating to get international support is that we would wish for international organizations such as the International Science Council or UNESCO to provide some kind of legal advice to academics who are wishing to do such kind of international partnerships and supporting such international partnerships in crisis situations. We also wish to have access to security structures and financial security, and we wish there was a structure which would provide those to academics. Yeah, and we would also wish for a strengthening of the importance of such third mission activities and higher education institutions' performance indicators, because something we've been struggling with over the last years, that with a focus on indicators which are only looking at third-party funding, the amount of third-party funding, and also publication as performance indicators of institutions. Such important work in international partnerships is not acknowledged within university structures, and this is the case for us both in Iraq as it is in Germany as it is in Austria. That higher education authorities are questioning whether the work we are doing is a job of academics and universities to do, or whether that is something, which is rather considered development work, and scientists should not be acting as part of academic solidarity activities. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to having a discussion a little bit later. Before I close, I also wanted to invite my two colleagues who are also here. They wanted to add something from their perspective to please do and correct me also on things I may have said which are not correct. Thank you. So I think there's Dahir.
Thank you so much for this all explanation and giving us also for Maximiliano, also giving us the space to speak a little bit about in minority perspective, or in, I did not prepare anything, but I would say what I I've experienced through RISI projects in perspective of minority. It was for me, for being with the RISI project and seeing this, as Professor Haika mentioned, Yazidi students participating in this conference, it was really something moving or emotional for me. It was really something that's after like Yazidi genocide in 2014, it was something really great to see the students again in campus. And for me, it was like first time, it's been like 10 years visiting Mosul again. I was with the last conference with the colleagues there, and to be able to walk in the campus and see Yazidi students or Christian students within the campus, it was something for me really moving. And during our conference also, like there was on one of the project, like there was 3 girls working with one of lecturers. They did a presentation about empowering women, and they brought a Yazidi activist, Nadia Murad, her picture to be within their painting, and how could, because she was escaped from ISIS, and she won a Nobel Prize Peace for Peace, and that's why they thought that could be they are Christian and Muslim, and they brought a woman like Yazidi from the minority women to be the symbol of resilience and empowerment to be within the conference. For me, that was really something I really respect. That for me was great. And for Yazidi minority as students, it wasn't before ISIS. It wasn't from ISIS, but it was before ISIS. As my personal experience, I went to Mosul in 2011 to like postpone my study. I just graduated from high school and postponed to be a mathematician. And then I came back, like we passed the checkpoint like 200 meters, and there was explosions within the checkpoint. That was for me in 2011, the last time that I visit Mosul since 2000, last March. It was really go back again to Mosul and it be kind of safe to feel like students moving within the street of Mosul, like kind of they feel like safe. That kind of, but still for minority, I think, and still at the university or like through this project, there is a lot they did, and always they focused on the minority to be their voice to be heard and to be within this conference, and that's something nice. But from the side of government or what local officials do, they did not reach the point that after genocide, this to give like a safe space to the Yazidi students to be within the campus or within the region, also the Mosul region or within Nineveh Valley. And I think still it's for many Yazidis feel they are like being pushed away from the country or their area, because still about 70% of Yazidi population that live in Sinjar, they still live in IDP camps in Kurdistan region. And in many area, like even though that was a big discussion, they brought like ISIS family from Syria back to Mosul again, and they have a camps, and they didn't return the Yazidi family from Duhok to their area. And still since 2018 it's liberated, and they have like legal power there, and some different kind of forces are there. There is some attention there, like within the political way, but still, I think if they want, or they could manage something to be a safe place to return back to their home and be safe. And what I can add, thank you so much again for letting me to share a little bit about what I felt and what happened during this conference. And I will share like last picture with you, if I could. From Yazidi. I cannot share. Okay. Okay, it's okay. I think only host can share it. Thanks so much again.
I don't know, Dr. Mohammed, if you also wanted to share something.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. This is Mohammed Nama. I am from University of Mosul. This university was distributed from ISIS. More than 70% of building was distributed. So our vision is to rethink the idea of our people. RISE is the good project to be rethink our students, even our teachers. So let me present my thanks on behalf of my colleagues or my University of Mosul to Professor Haik, to her effort to make this project, and did the everything to rebuild and rethink the higher education in Mosul University to be returned to first of university in Iraq. It's difficult to say something after her presentation and the whole presentation. So I have apology. I don't prepare any word.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Haki, for all your efforts to us. Thank you.
Well, I think
Thanks.
that's the closing for our panel. I understood there is a third one. Maybe there's opportunity for discussion. Yeah, later. I hope this served as an interesting example of what university partnerships maybe can do in conflict and not waiting until conflicts are resolved. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Heike. Thank you, Dashil, and thank you, Mohammed, for this really interesting presentation. I've been part of, I've been part of the last trip to Mosul, to the conference, and it was really impressive, especially when this initiative is an excellent example of how international cooperation can unlock the local potential that is already there and empower that. And I can assure you there's an immense potential in Mosul, and it was really well, kind of satisfying to see that international projects can actually work pretty well. We have so many negative examples. We heard a lot of pessimistic voices already today, but I think this is a very positive example. Well beneath, we speak often of failed states. Also today, Roy spoke about Somalia being a failed state. Iraq is often also called a failed state. But beneath the level of the state, there are so many encouraging, positive examples of how and what things can So thanks again. And Heike implied already that there is a Q&A session, but it's at the end of our conference. I hope, Heike, you can still make it. So let's, I'll hand over to the next panel, which is on Rojava. So please, Joseph.
Yeah, today Berso Mahmoud from the University of Rojava could not be here, could not attend this, could not participate in this conference. Alan told me this morning he had some private familiar issues, which are important. So yeah, it's unfortunate. But Alain Piret from the Center Teaching and Learning in Vienna, a political science student, which is also based in Kamshili, if I remember correctly, and Vienna, will introduce to you in this it will not be a panel discussion, of course, because Mahmoud is not here, but it will be an introduction to northern Syria, to Rojava, so-called Rojava. And please, Alan, yeah, and you will talk in German, if I remember correctly, and I will translate it into English. Please, Max or yeah, Janina, Heike, whoever wants to jump in, if I pronounce it not well, or if I do mistakes, please correct me and please add something if I'm Alan, please.
Danke, Josef, vielen Dank. Ja, ich werde auf Deutsch sprechen und ich werde dann so kurze Sätze, damit du auch schaffst, die zu übersetzen. Ja, es ist mir eine Freude, an dieser Friedenskonferenz teilnehmen zu dürfen.
Thank you, Joseph. It's an honor to be here.
Ich möchte mich anstelle von meinem Kollegen Berso Mahmoud aus der Universität Rojava entschuldigen, der leider heute nicht dabei sein konnte, weil seine Tochter plötzlich krank wurde und er sie zur medizinischen Behandlung nach Damaskus begleiten musste.
Unfortunately, Berso Mahmoud from the University of Rojava could not attend could not participate in this peace conference today because his daughter felt sick and he had to travel to Damascus.
Zunächst einmal möchte ich kurz die Lage in Syrien im Allgemeinen vorstellen und Ihnen mit dem Schwerpunkt meines Beitrages vertraut machen.
First of all, I want to introduce you to the current situation in Rojava.
Die Repression des Regimes ist nach wie vor sehr massiv und ist in den letzten Jahren weiterhin gestiegen.
There is a massive repression in Rojava and it's still going on.
Das Land ist weitgehend zerstört, also die Zerstörung ist ein Ergebnis vieler Gefechte und Kampfhandlungen auf syrischem Territorium seit dem Kriegsbeginn.
There is still a war going on in Syria and a great landmass is destroyed.
Und beschränkt sich keinerlei auf den Kampf zwischen dem Regime einerseits und den sogenannten oppositionellen Kräften andererseits, die heutzutage unüberschaubar sind. Dazu komme ich noch.
It is not limited to local actors.
Wie zum Beispiel der Kampf gegen den Islamischen Staat, den Kampf gegen weitere Terrornetzwerke, die in Syrien aktiv waren, Al-Nusra-Front beispielsweise.
So it's not, if I remember correctly, it's not limited to the Al-Nusra Front.
Also wie der Kampf gegen den Islamischen Staat, den Kampf gegen weitere Terrornetzwerke, die in Syrien immer noch aktiv waren, Al-Nusra Front beispielsweise.
Yeah, there were several fronts and fights in Syria after the civil war in 2011. So one example was ISIL and Al-Nusra Front.
Und eine politische und friedliche Lösung des Konfliktes ist trotz der vielen internationalen Bemühungen, beispielsweise UN-Sicherheitsrat Resolution 2254 von 2015, Genfer Friedensverhandlungen, Astana-Verhandlungen, Sochi-Verhandlungen, ist nicht in Aussicht.
Unfortunately, there is no political or peaceful solution that we can see.
Denn alles scheint so zu sein, als ob dem andauernden Krieg kein baldiges Ende gesetzt werden kann.
Unfortunately, we cannot see an end of this war in
Die
Syria.
Entwicklungen, die aktuellsten Entwicklungen können anhand dieser Beispiele nun skizziert werden. Also ein bekanntes, ja.
The recent developments can be portrayed as the following.
Ein bekanntes Beispiel in diesem Kontext wäre die Entwicklung der Freien Syrischen Armee, die als militärischer Unterstützer der Revolution gesehen wurde.
One example was the Free Syrian Army, which was declared as a liberation movement.
Diese Miliz hat sich im Verlauf des Kriegsgeschehens sehr verändert. Nun kämpft sie als Teil der von der Türkei unterstützten syrischen Nationalen Armee, hauptsächlich gegen die Kurden im Norden des Landes.
The Free Syrian Army is now in a coalition with Turkey, and they are fighting the Kurds in Rojava. So they changed their character or their purpose.
Genau. Nachdem das Baas-Regime mehrere von ihr kontrollierten Gebiete im Land zurückerobert hat. Die wichtigsten syrischen Städte, die Umgebung von Damaskus, Aleppo, Hama, Homs, Daraa und andere.
This happened after the Ba'ath regime under Assad regained the territories of Damascus and
Aleppo, Hama.
Aleppo, Hama, yeah.
Diese Entwicklung ist im Kontext des syrischen Kontexts im syrischen Kontext sehr wichtig, denn die angebliche Revolution war gegen das Assad-Regime gerichtet. Das war das Ziel der Massenproteste in den friedlichen Jahren des Aufstandes 2011 und 2012.
Initially in 2011, the uprising began with the idea, with the goal to change the Ba'ath regime, the Assad regime, and to install sort of more equal social, more equality.
Diese Entwicklung verkomplizierte die Situation und spaltete die Gesellschaft weiterhin und hat darüber hinaus zu einer tieferen Etablierung des de facto Status die aktuelle Lage in Syrien, ein Land, welches von 3 de facto Mächte regiert wird, beigetragen.
The failed revolution is now more dangerous. It's bringing up a more dangerous situation. And you mentioned 3 factors.
Also die aktuelle Lage in Syrien, ein Land, welches von 3 de facto Mächte regiert wird. Also die Kurden auf der einen Seite, das Regime und noch die oppositionellen Kräfte Idlib.
So now in Syria there are de facto 3 powers or 3 groups, political interest groups in power. The Assad regime on the one hand,
und die oppositionellen Kräfte Idlib und die kurdische Selbstverwaltung im Nordosten des Landes.
Then there is the Rojava, the autonomous administration of northern and east Syria, and the opposition.
Mit Sicherheit spielte ebenfalls der transnationale Terrorismus in Syrien, also sprich IS, eine zentrale Rolle im Kriegsgeschehen. So gelang der IS im Juni 2014 ist es gewesen, ein Kalifat in Syrien und im Irak auszurufen.
Unfortunately, the ISIL or ISIS installed caliphate in this region and destabilized it.
Dessen Hauptstadt, die heute von SDF, Demokratische Kräfte Syriens, die sich als die Streitkräfte der Selbstverwaltung von Nordostsyrien darstellen, kontrollierte syrische Stadt Raqqa war.
I don't know if I understand it correctly. The autonomous administration of northern eastern Syria controls now
Die damalige Hauptstadt von IS, also das war die Stadt Raqqa, ganz genau.
Yeah, and so nowadays the Rojava is in control of the former capital of Al-Araqqa, so the capital of the Caliphate.
Der Terrorismus an sich in Syrien war eine höchst komplexe Frage, denn fast alle Kriegsparteien bezeichneten ihre Gegner und bezeichnen immer noch als Terroristen.
Each party is confronted with a specific situation because they are the opponents are basically labeled as terrorists. So each side labels the other side, the opponent, as terrorist.
Genau. Zum Beispiel so betrachtet immer noch das Assad-Regime die Rebellen von Beginn an als terroristische Gruppierungen, die zu kämpfen sind. Hingegen wurde das Assad-Regime ebenfalls als Terrorregime von den oppositionellen Kräften im Land wahrgenommen.
Assad labels even today his opponents, his political opponents, as terrorists, and on the other side, the opponents label Assad as a terrorist. So this game is played on both sides.
Genau. Aktuell gelten die SDF für die bewaffneten Gruppierungen, die ihre Hochburg in Idlib, wie bereits erwähnt, und weitere Gebiete im Nordwestsyrien haben, als eine Terrormiliz. Genauso sehen die SDF in diese bewaffneten Gruppierungen Terroristen, die vor allem nachdem sie von SDF kontrollierte Gebiete besetzt haben, also die Gebiete Afrin, Tel Abyad und Sedekanieh, zu kämpfen sind.
So Assad is seeing the territory which was liberated by the SDF, so by the Autonomous Administration of Northern and Eastern Syria in Afrin, as the terroristic organization, and they see it as a non-liberated, so to speak.
Also man könnte schon behaupten, dass es sich beim syrischen Konflikt darum handelt, Krieg aller gegen alle, wie Thomas Hobbes den Naturstand der menschlichen Gesellschaft bereits beschrieben hat.
We can compare the Syrian civil war and the ongoing war in Syria as a war each versus, no, how can I translate?
Aller gegen alle.
Someone can help me, each versus each? How can I translate it? Jeder gegen jeden? As Thomas Hobbes
against
pointed.
each other will be?
Also auf Englisch, was heißt das?
All against each other, I think.
All against each other, yes, yes.
Krieg aller gegen alle.
Thank you.
Genau. Also allerdings damit den syrischen Konflikt mit all seinen unterschiedlichen Aspekten begriffen wird, muss notwendigerweise auf die Rolle externer Akteure, Kräfte im Speziellen eingegangen werden.
In order to understand the complexity and the full history and context of the Syrian war and the situation in Syria, we need to understand the foreign actors and the local actors and all the different players and key powers and groups that are involved in this war.
Die unterschiedlichen Akteure verfolgten seit ihrer Involvierung in den Konflikt unterschiedliche machtpolitische, militärische, strategische und wirtschaftliche Interessen.
Each of them is following a different strategy, and they have different interests in this war, in this civil war.
Was zu einer weiteren Vertiefung und Verkomplizierung des syrischen Konfliktes insgesamt beigetragen hat.
Which leads us to a more complicated situation, and maybe we can say it also to escalation.
Also fest steht, dass die anhaltend massive Repression des Assad-Regimes und seine Politik, die Massenproteste mit voller Gewalt zu beenden, sowie die Militarisierung der friedlichen Protestbewegung in den ersten Jahren und die Internationalisierung des syrischen Konfliktes, die zentrale und wesentliche Rolle externer Akteure, vor allem die arabischen Staaten, Russland, Iran und später USA und die Türkei, sodass momentan Streitmächte von 5 Staaten auf syrischem Territorium anwesend sind. Also feststeht, dass diese massive Repression und all das den Wandel von einer zu Beginn friedlichen Protestbewegung zu einem brutalen Bürgerkrieg begünstigten.
So the repression of the side of Assad and his regime led to a complicated situation because it transformed the peaceful revolution, the peaceful uprising in Syria to a civic war. And after that, it transformed to another dimension, to a proxy war between 5 states. So you mentioned Russia, Turkey, the US, I believe Israel and
Türkei, USA.
Turkey, and yeah, the US, I believe Israel as well. And yeah.
Die neuesten Entwicklungen im Land geben wenig Hoffnung auf ein baldiges Ende des bestehenden Gewaltkonfliktes. Außerdem gibt es unterschiedliche Szenarien, wie und in welcher Form eine politische und friedliche Lösung des gesamten Konfliktes aussehen könnte.
The recent developments are not in could be described as negative because there is no hope for peace.
Denn die vielen unterschiedlichen Akteure sind sich immer noch nicht über eine derartige Konfliktlösung einig. Also dies führte notwendigerweise zu einer weiteren Verfestigung des aktuellen de facto Status und einer tieferen Spaltung in Politik und Gesellschaft.
All the states, the different parties and states that are involved in this civil war hardened the front line, so to speak, of this war, and therefore each of them has their own interests, and therefore peace is not.
Und erweiterte dadurch die Kluft zwischen den einzelnen beteiligten Kriegsparteien, was letztendlich das Finden und die Durchsetzung einer friedlichen politischen Lösung massiv erschwert.
And yeah, this complicated front line shows the cleavages that are there.
Ich möchte aber nicht pessimistisch wirken. Allerdings gibt es bislang keine Einigung unter den derzeitigen aktiven Konfliktparteien über die zukünftige Staatsform, Demokratieform und wie die Kampfhandlungen beendet werden können.
I don't want to sound pessimistic, but today there is no
Einigung unter den derzeitigen.
There is no solution to the problems of state form, governance, and what.
Also Staatsform, Demokratieform und wie die anhaltenden Kampfhandlungen beendet werden könnten.
Yeah, so there is no consensus about the form of the state and about democracy and who will lead this region.
Sprich, also wie könnte man einen stabilen, langfristigen Waffenstillstand erreichen, die türkische Angriffe auf die Kurdenregion mit Drohnen anhalten, all diese Fragen.
And it's also connected with the question of ceasefire and how to construct peace and a peaceful society.
Also die türkischen Angriffe auf die Kurdenregion dauern bis zum heutigen Tag und das erschwert eine baldige friedliche Lösung. Ne?
The invasion of Turkey in the recent weeks and months, and it is still ongoing, is also a factor that is making peace impossible at this time.
Also, das Regime bestrebt eine vollständige Zurückeroberung des gesamten syrischen Territoriums, also das Land wie vor 2011 allein regieren und über alles herrschen.
Assad is trying to recover his territories that he lost after the breakout of the civil war in 2011-12, and so his position is unite the Syrian territory as it was before the civil war.
Und die oppositionellen Kräfte hingegen sind derzeit sehr zersplittert und von der Türkei abhängig. Also die haben seit der ersten türkischen Offensive in Afrin 2018 das Vertrauen sehr geschwächt, sodass sie sich nun mit dem kurdischen Akteur nicht mehr über eine mögliche friedliche Lösung einigen können.
And the opposition also is divided, and the opposition is not ready to negotiate with the autonomous administration of northern and eastern Syria.
Außerdem ist die wesentliche Abhängigkeit in militärischer, finanzieller und politischer Hinsicht von der Türkei ein weiterer Grund, warum keine politische und friedliche Konfliktlösung unter diesen beiden Konfliktparteien, also Kurden auf der einen Seite und die oppositionellen Kräften auf der anderen Seite, erzielt werden kann.
We can observe an dependence from the opposition and on Turkey, which makes also peace more difficult.
Die kurdisch geprägte Selbstverwaltung von Nordostsyrien, Rojava, ist ebenfalls am Konflikt beteiligt. Rojava wird aber inzwischen als eine Alternative wahrgenommen.
Rojava is also part of this conflict, and it is widely seen around the world as an alternative to the opposition and to the Ba'ath regime.
Man möchte nun im Kontext eines friedlichen und demokratischen Übergangs vom Krieg zu einem Nachkriegssyrien Rojava als Vorbild nehmen und sich an dessen Projekt und Perspektive der Konfliktlösung orientieren.
Rojava could be seen or want to be seen as an alternative and a peace project with an equal society.
Die Kurdinnen haben eine gemeinsame Verwaltung etabliert. In dieser Selbstverwaltung, Rojava, werden nicht nur Kurdinnen vertreten, sondern sind auch andere Ethnien und religiöse und konfessionelle Minderheiten daran in einer vollen Gleichstellung mit Kurdinnen beteiligt.
Those associated with Kurdish identity, Rojava includes many non-Kurdish groups. And they are integrated in the political system and in the administration.
Also Rojava konnte inmitten des syrischen Bürgerkriegs die kulturelle und sprachliche Vielfalt Syriens bewahren und sie weiterhin vor Spaltung und Involvierung in Kampfhandlungen schützen.
Northeastern Syria can be seen in middle of this war as a polyethnic society and home of ethnic Kurds, Arabs, Assyrian population, and many others, Turkmens, Armenian, and Yazidis, and many others. And it's a safe place for all of them.
Ganz genau. Also und Rojava ist nach wie vor ein interessantes Beispiel für die politische Partizipation. Also alle Leitungsfunktionen werden von einem Mann und einer Frau besetzt, das Vorsitzende System.
Rojava's administration is very specific. It is some sort of direct democracy, and it has double. Each political position is like on double seated. So there's a woman and a man in place in charge in this administration.
Also die Präsenz der Frauen ist sehr stark und im Vergleich zu anderen Konfliktparteien, also wie sie mit den Frauen und ihre Rolle und Partizipation umgehen. Also die Frau ist ein wichtiger Bestandteil des gesellschaftlichen und öffentlich-politischen Lebens. Ebenfalls wird ihr einen Platz in kommenden Friedensverhandlungen versichert.
So one can say that the administration and also it isn't reflected in the political system that the woman plays a crucial and important part in this political system.
Rojava bestrebt, also da haben wir ja genannt, was die zwei anderen Konfliktparteien alles so wollen. Rojava hingegen bestrebt ein demokratisches, dezentralisiertes Syrien. Und die Idee der Dezentralisierung ist im syrischen Kontext deswegen geeignet, denn es geht die Verteilung der Macht.
The Constitution of Rojava provides to all residents fundamental rights such as gender equality, freedom of religion, property rights, and it is at its core it aims to create a social just society with direct democracy, and yeah.
Und das Regime, also zum Beispiel das Regime kann und darf nicht mehr über das gesamte Land herrschen. Die oppositionellen Gruppierungen, die vor allem im Nordwesten des Landes aktiv sind, pochen weiterhin auf einen zentralisierten Staat.
And decentralizing the political system is also a crucial part of it, because it allows the opposition to take to stay in power, so to speak, and to have a word to say in the political system.
Rojava leidet aber derzeit unter einer ökonomischen Krise aufgrund der anhaltenden Belagerung der Region. Rojava wird weiterhin von der Türkei bedroht. Es kann jederzeit eine 4. türkische Offensive stattfinden.
Rojava suffers nowadays from an economic crisis and a devastating war invasion from Turkey.
Also die Selbstverwaltung Rojava ist seit Jahren sehr belastet. Sie betreut zahlreiche Flüchtlingscamps, in denen Jesiden, Vertriebene von Afrin, Serikaniye, Tel Abyad unterbracht sind.
This crisis and this situation with Turkey triggered a massive migration crisis also.
Zudem kommt noch ein großes Flüchtlingslager für IS-Familienangehörige, in dem 70.000 Flüchtlinge, vor allem Kinder, Frauen und ältere Menschen, versorgt und betreut werden.
It organized or it supported an migration camp from former ISIL
IS-Familienangehörige.
From former ISIL members.
Also die Selbstverwaltung Rojava hat noch eine weitere große Herausforderung in Bezug auf IS-Gefangene. Also es handelt sich dabei um ca. 5.000 Häftlinge, die sich derzeit in einem Hochsicherheitsgefängnis in Hasaka, das ist eine Stadt in Rojava, befinden.
Rojava have to deal with another key problem because it has around 5,000 prisoners from IS fighters. In prison.
Die nicht nur syrische Staatsbürger sind, sondern auch aus unterschiedlichen Ländern der Welt kommen, unter anderem Europäer und aus anderen Ländern der Welt.
These fighters actually came from many parts of the world, even from Europe. So they are not Syrian or members of this community in Rojava.
Zusammenfassend lässt sich sagen, dass eine friedliche Lösung des syrischen Konflikts nicht geben kann ohne Dezentralisierung und Demokratisierung des Landes, die sich nicht nur auf die staatlichen Institutionen beschränken darf, sondern im Sinne der radikalen Demokratietheorien passieren soll.
To sum up, a peaceful solution can only be implemented when direct democracy is installed, and
Also die erweiterte Demokratisierung soll außerdem das verhindern, was vorher im Irak und Afghanistan geschehen ist. Also die Instabilität ist auf formale Demokratie, die sich auf lediglich staatliche Institutionen beschränkte, zurückzuführen.
So the concept of radical or direct democracy can lead to more stabilization, and it makes the actors, the political actors, not dependent on the state institutions.
Also das heißt, provisorische Lösungen und kurzfristige Waffenstillstände werden den Konflikt nur noch verkomplizieren.
Temporary ceasefires and tactical solution will only harden the conflict and the cleavages.
Also Syrien ist ein Land, in dem es viele Ethnien und Religionen und kulturelle Minderheiten gibt. Der Frieden kann nur durch eine demokratisch basierte politische und gesellschaftliche Vermittlung gesichert werden.
Northeastern Syria, so-called Rojava, is polyethnic, and the only way to peace is by installing administration with direct democracy, with ambitions of libertarian, socialist, and decentralization, promoting decentralization and gender equality. And of course, we have to mention the environmental sustainability.
Außerdem ist es wichtig, sich auf eine kollektive syrische Identität zu einigen, abseits von der Spitzen der einzelnen Konfliktparteien. Also die Menschen müssen sich versammeln und diskutieren in jeglicher Form, um zu bestimmen, wie nun doch durch eine kollektive Identität
it is important to establish an assembly with the goal to make a consent to establish a consent on the political identity and ethnical identity of the region.
Also eine kollektive Identität, die auf der 4 unverhandelbaren Prinzipien der Demokratie basieren, sprich Freiheit, Gleichheit, Solidarität und Souveränität, und die ethnische, religiös, konfessionelle, kulturelle und sprachliche Vielfalt der Gesellschaft schätzen muss.
So the collective identity should be on 4 pillars: freedom, equality, sovereignty, and solidarity.
Und wie nun doch durch diese kollektive Identität, von der wir gerade gesprochen haben, die Nachkriegsordnung aussehen könnte und darf.
Once again?
Also und wie nun doch durch diese kollektive Identität, von der wir gerade gesprochen haben, die Nachkriegsordnung aussehen könnte und darf.
So, if I understand you correctly, this collective identity is important for the aftermath after the war, civil war and proxy war in Syria.
Genau. Und vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Das war mein Beitrag.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Danke, danke.
So with all with this panel discussion, which was actually not a panel discussion on Rojava, but yeah, with this speech on Rojava, I would like to thank you for your attention. Last, we have a video message or keynote from Yuri Zhelyashenko. He is a peace activist in Kiev, and he is executive secretary of the Ukrainian pacifist movement. He's a part of World Beyond War. He is the Sean McBride Peace Prize winner 2022. And with his speech in this difficult time in Kiev, we will listen to his words. And after that, we can sum up, we can make it an open place for ideas, for discussion, or even for connecting to each other, and for a short Q&A session. Or yeah, some of you can, of course, leave. So yeah, now I will play the video. But first I have to share my screen. Okay, so I hope you can.
Dear friends, greetings from Kiev, capital of Ukraine. I represent Ukrainian pacifist movement, a small group of enthusiasts focused on advocacy of peace by peaceful means and conscientious objection to military service. It is hard mission, but imperative of our conscience does not give us other choice. We believe that war is a crime against humanity, and therefore we should not support any kind of war, and we should strive for the removal of all causes of war. We think about ourselves as a small group representing a large social tendency. People need peace. People avoid participation in bloodshed, but idea of peace in Ukraine is stigmatized by propaganda of war. Civil society is poisoned by hate and militarism, and even well-funded projects which supposed to promote peace, in fact promote social cohesion against war effort. Ukrainian pacifist movement was founded in 2019 during protests against cruel military draft, police raids, abductions, and detainment of young people at the streets. We protested at Ukrainian parliament building near the presidential office, demanded to abolish conscription and to end the war. It was time of hope that newly elected President Zelensky will stop the war as he promised. Instead, he decided to break promises and be tough guy. And we had meetings, we worked for peace. Also, we organized several peace education events and joined in international networks of peace movements such as War Resisters International, European Bureau for Conscientious Objection, International Peace Bureau, World Beyond War, Eastern European Network for Citizenship Education, and so on. This year, we adopted statements condemning Russian aggression against Ukraine. We condemn Russian invasion, and we call for diplomatic solution. And recently, we adopted a strategic document, which is called Peace Agenda for Ukraine and the World. In this document, we emphasized that current policies of war until absolute victory and contempt for criticism of human rights defenders is unacceptable and must be changed. What is needed is a ceasefire, peace talks, and serious work to correct the tragic mistakes made on both sides of conflict by militarists in Russia and Ukraine. Because there are no victims among militarists, they are cause of war. Victims are peace-loving civilians in Ukraine and also in Russia. Prolongation of the war has catastrophic, deadly consequences. And this prolongation of war continues to destroy the welfare of society and environment, not only in Ukraine, but throughout the world. Sooner or later, parties will sit at the negotiating table, if not after their reasonable decisions, then under the pressure of unbearable suffering and weakening. And of course, it would be better if decision in favor of diplomacy will be made in result of reasonable choice, not because of this weakening and unbearable suffering of people. Also, in the peace agenda for Ukraine and the world, we outlined that human right to conscientious objection to military service in Ukraine was not guaranteed according to international standards, even in peacetime, not to mention the current conditions of martial law. The state shamefully avoided for decades and now continues to avoid any serious response to the relevant suggestions according to protection of human right to conscientious objection to military service, the suggestions of the United Nations Human Rights Committee. And also the state ignores public protests. The state just decided that Ministry of Defense is in charge of all politics concerning military recruiting, and therefore the military decide whether to comply with human rights standards. They doesn't care about human rights standards, unfortunately. Also, the state cannot derogate human right to conscientious objection to military service even in time of war or other public emergency, as says the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the army in Ukraine refuses to respect the universally recognized right to conscientious objection to military service. It denies even to replace coercive military service by mobilization with an alternative non-military service according to the direct prescription of the Constitution of Ukraine. Such scandalous disrespect to human rights should have no place under the rule of law. We know at least 5 cases of punishment of conscientious objectors by courts. Conscientious objection is treated as so-called evasion from mobilization, which according to Criminal Code of Ukraine is punishable by prison term from 3 to 5 years. Previously, courts replaced incarceration with probation, but recently Ivano-Frankivsk City Court sentenced Vitaly Alexeyenko to a year of prison for being a Christian and taking seriously the commandment, "You shall not kill." We are trying to help in this hard situation and in other hard situations. President of Ukrainian pacifist movement Ruslan Kotsaba was imprisoned more than for 500 days for his YouTube blog calling to boycott military mobilization. And he was acquitted. Then far-right people came to court with weapons and pressured the court. The higher court ordered retrial. Ruslan was under long, shameful retrial, and during this retrial, far-right crowds came to court, attacked Ruslan, attacked lawyers, and it is ended with some start of online hearings. Then the court, under new pressure, ordered that Ruslan should come in person and to find some asylum from this persecution and attacks in a situation when we have reasonable belief that these attacks are tolerated by law enforcement in Ukraine against the law, and attackers are not taken to responsibility. Ruslan found a way to go to Europe, and now he is working on promotion of our peace agenda among European politicians. He have meetings with members of European Parliament and so on. You can also find his interviews in German press. And by the way, many Ukrainian young people are strongly intended to study instead of participation in bloodshed. People actively enrolled into European universities, but State Border Guard of Ukraine just prohibited all males in age from 18 to 60 from leaving Ukraine. This prohibition is also not compliant with international human rights standards. And students are protesting. State Border Guard beaten one of students. They say that more than 8,000 people were prohibited from leaving Ukraine, and they called all these people who are trying to go abroad instead of being recruited against their will to participate in mass killing, which is war. So they called them so-called evaders, but we are calling Ukrainian government shameful evader from compliance with international human rights standards. So Ukrainian pacifist movement many times appealed to authorities with suggestions to ensure proper legal guarantees of human right to conscientious objection in Ukrainian legislation and administrative practice. Also, we urged other civil society organizations to support this initiative. Unfortunately, our calls were ignored or rejected with contempt. However, we continue relevant advocacy and research, helping also to individuals whose rights are violated. So to conclude, let me reiterate the three main tasks of peace movement. First task is to uphold human right to refuse to kill. We must claim legal right to conscientious objection to military service according to international human rights standards, helping to advocate and defend the right to refuse to kill. Second task is to stop the war. We must advocate immediate ceasefire, comprehensive good faith peace talks, nonviolent resistance to war, and worldwide transition towards nonviolent society. By the way, recently interesting report was published by researchers pointing out that there were at least 235 situations of non-violent resistance to Russian aggression in Ukraine. So it is not only protests against warmongering and calls to diplomacy, but also people literally stopping tanks unarmed, just standing on the way of tanks, like famous tank man. And our third task is to build peace. We must help civilians to survive, remaining civilians, telling the truth, giving hope, helping the needy, studying and teaching nonviolence. Because lack of knowledge, ignorance is the main cause of war. People believe in violence because they don't understand the harmfulness of vicious circle of violence, and they don't know how to live without violence. We must strengthen solidarity of civilians, of peace-loving people, and of peace movement in Ukraine and worldwide. As Ukrainian pacifists, as many Ukrainian people, we are grateful for loud voices of truth and peace from other countries. We need no military aid, but humanitarian aid for the poor and needy and suffering from 8-year war and recent 8 months of full-scale Russian aggression may be very helpful. We need intellectual, organizational, and financial resources to develop genuine peace culture, peace education, peace journalism, and genuine non-partisan mass peace movement, able to stop the war machine, insist on demilitarization and pacific resolution of international disputes. That is 3 ways in which international peace movement can pacify the growing military tensions between Ukraine and Russia, telling the truth to the people of the world, helping those who refuse to kill, and investing in peace culture. To conclude, peace lovers are frequently blamed in treason because of our loyalty to whole humankind. When you hear this pestering militarist nonsense, respond that we, the peace movements, are active everywhere. We expose the betrayal of peace, self-defeating dumbness and immorality of war on all sides across front lines. And this war will hopefully be stopped by the might of public opinion, by the power of sheer common sense. As I said, people in Ukraine and, by the way, in Russia too, and in Russia and Belarus, in Ukraine, people are protesting against war. People are avoiding this compulsory military mobilization. But people don't have enough knowledge to organize. There is a lot of passive protest, and the same people who are avoiding participation in bloodshed, they could say some words about support of war just to be protected from attacks of warmongers on all voices of peace. We need to develop a massive peace movement by developing peace education and news media, social media, voices for peace in informational space, in communication. Properly communicating to people this message of peace by peaceful means. And I hope that this war will be ended by the power of public opinion. And of course, it may disappoint Putin and Zelensky. They may be forced to resign. But when you have a choice between common sense and saber-rattling dictator who tries to turn you into cannon fodder against your will and threatens to punish you for refusal to kill your fellow human beings, common sense should prevail over tyranny in civil resistance to war efforts. Sooner or later, common sense will prevail in democratic way or under pressure of unbearable pains of war. Merchants of death developed a long-term profitable strategy of their war of attrition. Peace movement also have a long-term strategy to tell the truth, to expose lies, to teach peace, cherish hope, and work for peace tirelessly. But the most important part of our strategy is to empower public imagination. Public imagination is key for social change. We need to show that the world without wars is possible. And if militarists dare to challenge this beautiful vision, the best reply are beautiful words of John Lennon from his song Imagine. You may say I am a dreamer, but I am not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. Thank you for invitation to your conference. Let's build peace together.
So with these final touching words and remarks from the peace movement from Kiev, from Yuri Zhelyashenko, we are coming now to an end, and I want to give some of you the opportunity for a final remark. Yeah, that's it.
If I might say something, even if maybe concluding words, maybe not, because we started really pessimistically in the first presentation, then the second presentation already was also pessimistic, but at least already hinted some well space for optimism regarding well, liberal peace and capitalism. Tamara implied that well, we need to look for alternatives for liberal peace and capitalism. I think that is actually what is happening. We speak of crisis all the times, and well, it's so bad and so much on the verge of destruction. Like we are nanosecond before midnight when the whole world will fall apart and we'll all die for sure. Well, this mantra is being sang for 3,000 years, I guess, and we are always on the brink of death, collective death, and everything is so bad. But I think what we are actually witnessing, but might only be my opinion, well, we kind of see something falling apart and breaking, and but it might actually be the current world order, and which is massively influenced by liberal peace, but it also might be only a Eurocentric observation. Also, because I spoke about also Donald Trump and how he brought the world closer to collapse. It just reminded me of an interview with Slavoj Žižek when he was asked who shall win the elections in the US, whether it should be Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, and it didn't take Slavoj even a second to shout, of course, Donald Trump, because the face of the system that we have needs the ugly face that it deserves, and not the charming laughter of Hillary. So what might have happened is that something is being exposed more and more, and that is not an opportunity to cry after what we had before, but it opens up many spaces. Of course, you can always say in every crisis there is also hope for something better on a really superficial level, but I think that it actually does really do away with a lot of idealist visions that we have and which we clung to and thought that they would keep together the world, but it doing away with them well makes us engage more in working together on the world that we actually have, and you realize more and more that it's not people in Europe in their offices, but it's actually everyone. And well, that gives me a lot of optimism, I shall say, and that's how I would like to lead this conference, because we saw many positive examples. Also, it gives me a lot of optimism.
Thank you, Max. And once again, I want to thank all the participants, and I want to mention that we had participants from all over the world, from the Philippines, from Iraq, from northern Syria, from Vienna, from Germany, and also from Kiev, which is under heavy pressure and in a terrible war. We had a keynote speaker from Austin, Texas. So yeah, we might learn from each other, and it was a great opportunity for all of us to learn from each other. And I'm very thankful, yeah, for all of you to participate in this. And yeah, I'm very glad and honored.